Hey everyone, welcome back to AI Verdict. You know the drill. This is where we do the heavy research so you absolutely don't have to. Today, we're getting into a full explainer on DeepSeek V4. We're going to break down exactly what it is, the unique architecture under the hood, how it stacks up against the big competitors, and ultimately, whether it actually deserves a spot in your daily workflow. And hey, if you want to join our awesome community of AI enthusiasts, make sure to click the link down in the description to grab our free weekly newsletter. Let's get into it. So, you've probably heard the exact same story over and over again, right? If you want truly powerful AI, well, you're going to have to pay a premium for it. You get locked into these closed APIs, handing over cash for models like GPT-5, Claude, or Gemini, and you've got zero real way to fine-tune those models for your own specific use cases. Plus, historically, whenever a Chinese lab drops an open model, it kind of trails a few generations behind the bleeding edge. Well, DeepSeek V4 completely flips that script. When we dove into their technical report, we found a fully open model that actually matches GPT 5.4 on coding benchmarks, costs an absolute fraction of the price, and get this, it features a staggering 1 million token context window right out of the box. Insane, right? Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at how they're flipping the AI script. Then we'll break down the new V4 Pro and Flash models. After that, we'll explore the magic under the hood, run some head-to-head comparisons, look at real-world use cases, and finally, we'll talk about the catch, because yes, there are some limitations. Starting with Section 1, Flipping the AI Script, the underdog story. Now, if you aren't familiar, DeepSeek is a China-based AI startup that basically emerged out of nowhere back in 2023. I mean, they just started shipping models that punched way above their weight class right from day one. But their rapid rise definitely wasn't without major controversy. You might remember their viral chat app. It caused such a massive stir that the US government actually banned it on federal devices over security concerns, and South Korea completely paused downloads. It was wild. But they just kept building. Fast forward to 2025, they dropped DeepSeek V3.2, which was this massive 671 billion parameter beast. And that brings us to April 2026, where they previewed exactly what we are looking at today, DeepSeek V4. Moving on to Section 2, the models, V4 Pro and V4 Flash, the trillion-parameter twins. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale we're dealing with here. The V4 Pro boasts 1.6 trillion total parameters. Let that sink in for a second. That makes it the largest open LLM ever released. But here's the kicker, only 49 billion of those parameters are active at any given time. Then we've got the V4 Flash. This is the smaller, faster, cheaper variant packing 284 billion total parameters with 13 billion active. And honestly, the most surprising part of all this, both of these models support that massive 1 million token context window by default. Now you might be wondering, wait, how can a model have 1.6 trillion parameters but only 49 billion are active? Well, it's all thanks to an architecture called Mixture of Experts, or MOE for short. Think of it kind of like a giant iceberg. Those total 1.6 trillion parameters, that's the massive unseen bulk of the iceberg underwater. It represents the model's total capacity for knowledge. But those 49 billion active parameters, that's just the tip of the iceberg visible above the water. For any single token the model processes, only that specific little fraction actually fires up. So, you're getting the massive reasoning brain of a 1.6 trillion parameter giant, but with the lightning-fast reflexes of a much smaller, dense 50 billion parameter model. It's a best of both worlds situation. Which brings us to Section 3, Magic Under the Hood. Let's get into a technical deep dive. Now, what's really interesting about this is how they actually achieved this scale. They did it through 3 major technical upgrades. First up, manifold hyperconnections. You can think of these as basically smart on-ramps and off-ramps. They let information flow super cleanly through the deep layers of the model, which keeps the training totally stable even at this massive scale. Second, hybrid sparse attention. Look, normally processing 1 million tokens will absolutely melt your GPU budget. It gets incredibly expensive, but DeepSeek uses a clever 2-stage system. Early layers use heavily compressed attention to handle long context on the cheap, while the deeper layers step in to refine the details. Because of this, the KV cache, which is basically the model's short-term memory, only grows by 10%. To put that in perspective, V4 Pro uses about 27% of the processing power of V3.2 at the exact same context length. Absolutely wild. Finally, massive MOE. Every single block efficiently routes tokens across 384 distributed experts, and it uses highly efficient FP4 arithmetic to save a massive amount of compute. Oh, and they trained this whole thing on a staggering 32 to 33 trillion tokens, ramping up from a 4K sequence length all the way to that 1 million token capacity. But they didn't just stop at the raw architecture. DeepSeek has this brilliant post-training pipeline for a specific version they call V4 Pro Max. Instead of trying to fine-tune one giant, clunky model on everything all at once, they actually train separate, highly specialized domain experts. So one expert just for math, another just for coding, and another for agent behavior. Then, they distilled all of that hyper-specific expertise back into one single unified model. And guys, that unified V4 Pro Max model is the exact one that is just crushing the benchmarks right now.
All right, let's jump to Section 4, head-to-head comparisons. It's David versus the closed API Goliaths.
So how does this underdog actually stack up against the models you're probably paying for right now? Well, the V4 Pro Max is arguably the strongest open model available today. It ties GPT-5 for that massive 1 million token context length, totally dwarfing Claude 3's 200K and Llama 3.1's 128K. And on coding benchmarks, it runs right alongside GPT 5.4. It even edges out Gemini 3.0 on certain reasoning tasks. But here is the absolute most crucial part. DeepSeek V4 is MIT licensed. The weights, the code, it's all fully open. You can deploy it, fine-tune it, and control it completely. That is a massive, massive contrast to the lockdown ecosystems of GPT and Claude.
And then we have to talk about the cost, because the value proposition here hits incredibly hard. Look at this. DeepSeek V4 Flash costs just 14 cents per million input tokens and only 28 cents per million output tokens. Compare that to GPT-4o Mini at 60 cents. V4 Flash is roughly 4 times cheaper than Claude 3.5 Haiku. When you start talking about high-volume workloads, that math gets ridiculous fast. It makes large-scale automation economically realistic in a way it literally just wasn't before.
Next up, Section 5, Real-World Use Cases, applying the 1 million token context. Let's move past the raw benchmarks and see how this actually builds into everyday workflows. I really want to ground this massive number for you, because 1 million tokens isn't just a fun marketing gimmick. 1 million tokens equals an entire massive legal contract. It equals a full software code base, or literally an entire novel. And DeepSeek V4 can hold all of that in its memory simultaneously in a single prompt. To put that into perspective, the source report detailed this really fascinating anecdote. Imagine taking a massive, hundreds of pages long legal PDF, the kind of document that would normally take a whole paralegal team a week to review, and you just drop it into V4 with a single prompt. In one shot, with zero complex chunking or weird workarounds, V4 natively ingests the entire thing and instantly spits out a structured breakdown of the terms, the intellectual property rights, the financials, and the liabilities. Just like that. You can also feed it an entire code base to explain the architecture, or hook it up to coding tools to create an agent that plans, executes, and debugs on its own. For big data and due diligence, it's a total game changer. Let's wrap up with Section 6, the catch. V4 limitations, because we need to look objectively at where the open model falls short.
Look, while V4 is incredible, it isn't a perfect replacement for absolutely everything. First, it's strictly text only. There's no vision, no chart reading, and no audio. So if your workflow needs image input, V4 just isn't your tool. Second, the honest truth is that it does still trail the absolute frontier of GPT 5.4 and Gemini 3.1 by about 3 to 6 months on the absolute highest stakes reasoning tasks. Third, there are definitely some controversies. The training data is opaque, the safety alignment metrics aren't heavily published, and yeah, both Anthropic and OpenAI have accused DeepSeek of distilling their models. Finally, there's a heavy hardware tax. Running a 1.6 trillion parameter model, even with that sweet MOE efficiency, requires some serious heavy hardware. We're talking multiple Blackwell-class GPUs. And honestly, that's exactly why the smaller V4 Flash is the version most developers will actually end up using.
So, the crucial point to take away is this. DeepSeek V4 isn't necessarily here to beat GPT 5.4 on every single absolute benchmark score. It's here to give you 90% of the capability at 10% of the cost, with full open source control. Which leaves us with a pretty massive question for the future of AI. With open models matching the frontier at a fraction of the cost, is the era of the closed API monopoly officially over? Let that sink in as you consider your own AI workflows. If this explainer helped clarify the complex world of V4 for you, please remember to hit that subscribe button for the free weekly newsletter down in the description. Thanks so much for joining me on AI Verdict, and I'll catch you in the next